The first thing people noticed about my grandfather's house wasn't the peeling paint. It wasn't the rusted mailbox. And it definitely wasn't the squeaky porch swing hanging beside the front door. It was the fact that the house refused to change. Every home around it had transformed over the years. Modern stone walls, luxury SUVs, smart security systems, freshly landscaped lawns that looked more artificial than real. But Grandpa Walter's house? It stayed exactly the same. A small white farmhouse sitting in the center of Maple Ridge Estates like a stubborn memory nobody could erase. And apparently, the HOA board hated that. Your grandfather's house makes a neighborhood look poor. That's what HOA President Cheryl Simmons told me the first time we met. She said it with a smile, too, like insulting an 82-year-old veteran was somehow professional. I still remember the heat rising in my chest. We were standing in Grandpa's driveway while he fixed an old lawnmower beside the garage. He looked up slowly after hearing her comment. Then he simply smiled. "Funny," Grandpa said calmly. "This neighborhood didn't look poor when it was farmland." Cheryl's smile disappeared instantly. That was the problem with my grandfather. He never got intimidated. Not by money, not by lawyers, and definitely not by fake authority. Grandpa Walter Morgan was a kind of man who survived Vietnam, raised 4 kids, buried his wife, and still woke up every morning before sunrise to drink black coffee on his porch. People assumed age made him weak. Big mistake. I moved into Grandpa's house temporarily after losing my apartment during a company downsizing. At first, I planned to stay maybe 2 months. That turned into nearly a year. Honestly, I didn't mind. Life at Grandpa's place felt real. No fake luxury. No pretending. Just old wood floors, homemade breakfast, and stories about how the town used to look before developers swallowed everything. According to Grandpa, Maple Ridge Estates used to be acres of farmland owned by local families. Then investors arrived. They built giant houses, created an HOA, and slowly turned the area into one of those elite communities where neighbors cared more about property values than people. Grandpa refused to participate. That drove Cheryl Simmons crazy. The violation letters started appearing almost immediately after I moved in. Grass height violation, mailbox appearance violation, improper porch furniture violation. One notice literally complained that Grandpa's wind chimes were aesthetic disturbances. I laughed when I read that. Grandpa didn't. He tossed the letter into the trash without even finishing it. "Bullies always hide behind paperwork," he muttered. Cheryl escalated quickly. Every week brought new threats. Fines, warnings, mandatory improvement notices. One afternoon she showed up with 3 HOA board members and started taking pictures of Grandpa's house from the sidewalk. Grandpa walked outside wiping grease from his hands. "Can I help you folks?" Cheryl pointed toward the porch. "That swing violates updated neighborhood appearance standards." Grandpa looked at the swing quietly. "My wife bought that swing in 1974. "We understand sentimental value," Cheryl replied coldly, "but the community has standards." That sentence changed Grandpa's expression. Not anger, disappointment. The kind older people get when they realize common decency disappeared somewhere along the way. "You know what your problem is?" Grandpa asked. Cheryl folded her arms. "I'm sure you'll tell me." "You think money creates class." The other board members shifted awkwardly. Cheryl forced another smile. "This discussion isn't personal." "Yes, it is." Silence. Then Grandpa pointed toward the road. "You people moved into a neighborhood built on land families fought to keep for generations." Cheryl rolled her eyes. "And now it's a premium residential community." Grandpa laughed softly. That confused them. Not happy laughter. The kind that says somebody just embarrassed themselves without realizing it. "Well," Grandpa said, "that's one way to describe it." Then he walked back inside. The board members looked irritated, but Cheryl looked offended, like Grandpa's refusal to fear her personally insulted her ego. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't about house appearance. It was about control. People like Cheryl need obedience. And Grandpa Walter Morgan didn't obey anyone. Over the next month, things got worse. HOA fines stacked up rapidly. They claimed Grandpa owed over $12,000 in violations. $12,000 for an old porch swing and chip paint. I nearly exploded when I saw the latest notice. This is harassment. Grandpa stayed calm. Of course it is. So why aren't you fighting them? He smiled slightly while sipping coffee. Because some people dig their own graves if you give them enough room. I had no idea what he meant. Not yet. Then Cheryl made the biggest mistake of her life. During the monthly HOA meeting, she publicly mocked Grandpa in front of the entire neighborhood. And everything changed. The clubhouse was packed that night, mostly because Cheryl loved dramatic meetings. She stood near the projector screen wearing a bright red blazer like she was running for office. Maple Ridge Estates must maintain its image, she announced. Then Grandpa's house appeared on the screen. People murmured uncomfortably. Even they knew this felt wrong. Cheryl pointed at the image. This property continues lowering neighborhood standards. I stood instantly. You're talking about an 82-year-old veteran's home. And Cheryl snapped. Grandpa touched my arm gently. Sit down, Daniel. I sat there, barely. Then Cheryl said something that made the entire room freeze. Frankly, homes like this belong in the past. Complete silence. Grandpa slowly stood up. Every eye in the room followed him. He looked around calmly before speaking. You know what's funny? Nobody answered. Grandpa smiled faintly. You people spent years trying to force me out of this house. Cheryl crossed her arms. Because you refused to comply. No, Grandpa replied. Because none of you bothered learning who originally owned this street. Now people look confused. Even Cheryl. Grandpa reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. Old, yellowed, carefully preserved. Then he placed it on the table in front of the board. You should probably read that before threatening me again. Cheryl grabbed the paper impatiently. At first her expression stayed confident. Then it changed. Fast. The color drained from her face. One board member leaned closer. Another adjusted his glasses. Then somebody whispered, No way. I frowned. What is it? Grandpa leaned back calmly. The original land ownership deed. The room stayed silent. Then Grandpa delivered the sentence that would destroy the HOA forever. My family still owns the land underneath this entire street. At first, nobody believed him. Honestly, neither did I. The entire clubhouse sat frozen while Cheryl stared at the old document like it had personally insulted her. One of the board members finally cleared his throat. This can't be correct. Grandpa Walter smiled calmly. Oh, it's correct. Cheryl slammed the papers onto the table. You're bluffing. No. The room erupted into whispers. People pulled out phones. Neighbors leaned across chairs trying to see the document. Meanwhile, Grandpa stood there looking completely relaxed, like a man who'd known a secret for decades and finally decided the time had come. I stared at him. You never told me this. Grandpa shrugged. You never asked. That answer somehow made perfect sense. Robert Diaz, one of the quieter board members, picked up the paperwork carefully. Walter, according to this deed, your family retained easement ownership rights across the original subdivision roads. Correct. And these signatures are from the 1981 development agreement. Also correct. Now Cheryl looked nervous. For the first time since I'd met her, genuinely nervous. She grabbed the microphone. This changes nothing. The HOA still governs neighborhood standards. Grandpa tilted his head. Does it? That question hit differently, because suddenly nobody sounded certain anymore. Grandpa slowly sat back down while the board whispered among themselves. Then he looked around the room. My father sold portions of this land to developers 4 to 5 years ago, he explained. But he kept partial ownership rights over the roads and utility access. One homeowner frowned. What does that mean? Grandpa smiled. It means the Morgan family never fully surrendered control of Maple Ridge. Now people looked stunned. Even the homeowners who normally ignored HOA politics suddenly paid attention. Cheryl tried recovering. This is irrelevant. Grandpa chuckled softly. No, Cheryl, what's irrelevant is your authority if those agreements were violated. That sentence landed like a grenade. Board members started flipping through papers rapidly. One man whispered, Oh my God! Another homeowner stood up. Wait, are you saying the HOA might not legally control the street? Grandpa nodded once. Potentially. Complete chaos erupted. People started shouting questions. Phones rang. Neighbors argued across the room. Cheryl slammed the table repeatedly. Order! Order! Nobody listened, because for years the HOA acted untouchable. Now suddenly the entire foundation beneath Maple Ridge looked unstable. And it all traced back to one old man everybody underestimated. After the meeting ended, Cheryl cornered Grandpa in the parking lot. I stayed close, mostly because she looked furious enough to explode. You planned this, she hissed. Grandpa adjusted his jacket. No, I warned you repeatedly to leave me alone. You've been hiding legal documents from the board. Grandpa laughed. Those documents were filed publicly with the county before you moved here. That shut her up for exactly 2 seconds. Then she pointed toward him. You think this changes your violations? No, Grandpa replied calmly. I think this changes your future. That line stayed with me, because Grandpa didn't sound angry. He sounded certain. The next morning, Maple Ridge Estates exploded with rumors. Some neighbors claimed Grandpa secretly owned half the neighborhood. Others believed the HOA was about to collapse entirely. One dramatic Facebook post even claimed residents might lose their homes. Tyler, my younger cousin who practically lived online, showed me the comments while laughing. People are losing their minds. Grandpa ignored all of it. He sat on the porch drinking coffee like nothing happened. Meanwhile, Cheryl went into full damage control mode. The HOA sent emergency emails claiming community governance remained stable. That only made everyone panic harder. By afternoon, luxury SUVs lined the street outside Grandpa's house. Lawyers, HOA representatives, even real estate agents. Everybody suddenly wanted to talk to Walter Morgan. Grandpa refused every meeting. Except one. County Records investigator Samuel Pierce arrived around 4 p.m. Unlike everyone else, he didn't wear an expensive suit, just khakis, dusty boots, and an expression that said he'd seen plenty of legal disasters before. He spent nearly 2 hours reviewing Grandpa's paperwork at the kitchen table. I watched quietly while they talked. Finally, Samuel leaned back. Well, Grandpa smiled. That bad? Samuel exhaled slowly. Worse. My stomach tightened. What exactly is happening? I asked. Samuel rubbed his forehead. The original development contract required HOA compliance with land access agreements owned by the Morgan family. Grandpa nodded. Correct. Samuel continued. If the HOA violated those terms through selective enforcement or harassment, the Morgan estate potentially has legal standing. Legal standing for what? Samuel looked directly at me. By Friday morning, Maple Ridge Estates felt like a neighborhood waiting for an earthquake. Nobody knew exactly what would happen, but everybody sensed something massive was unfolding behind closed doors. The HOA board stopped sending violation notices. Maintenance crews disappeared, and Cheryl Simmons suddenly avoided public appearances. That alone terrified people, because Cheryl never avoided attention. She practically survived on it. Meanwhile, lawyers moved through the neighborhood nonstop. Black sedans parked outside the clubhouse. County officials reviewed records. Even local reporters started showing up. Apparently, HOA bullies veteran who secretly owns a street makes excellent news headlines. Tyler sat in Grandpa's kitchen scrolling through articles. You're trending online, Grandpa. Grandpa frowned. I don't know what that means. It means the internet loves you. That sounds dangerous. Honestly, he wasn't wrong. But the internet wasn't the HOA's biggest problem anymore. The paperwork was. Around noon, Samuel Pierce returned carrying a thick folder. He looked exhausted. That bad? I asked. Samuel dropped the folder onto the kitchen table. You have no idea. Grandpa poured him coffee quietly. Then Samuel opened the file. Over the last 12 years, the HOA approved multiple property modifications that violated the original Morgan Development Agreement. I frowned. What kind of violations? Samuel flipped through papers. Unauthorized road expansions, utility alterations, restricted access changes. Grandpa shook his head slowly. They never read the contract. Nope. Samuel continued. And according to county records, every major board since 2011 ignored mandatory approval clauses connected to Morgan family easement rights. That sounded serious. Very serious. But then Samuel delivered the real bombshell. If challenged legally, portions of HOA enforcement authority could be invalidated retroactively. I blinked. Retroactively. Samuel nodded, meaning thousands of previous fines and enforcement actions may not hold up in court. Tyler nearly spit out his drink. You're kidding. I wish I was. Grandpa leaned back calmly. You know what the funniest part is? What? Samuel asked. I tried warning them years ago. Apparently, Grandpa once attended an HOA legal review meeting nearly a decade earlier. He mentioned the original land agreements. The board ignored him. One former member allegedly laughed and called the old contracts outdated farmer paperwork. Big mistake, because outdated paperwork still matters when courts get involved, especially signed contracts. By afternoon, homeowners started arriving at Grandpa's house, not to complain, to apologize. One elderly couple admitted they stayed silent while the HOA targeted him because they feared retaliation. Another family confessed Cheryl pressured them into expensive renovations. A retired firefighter said he paid over $18,000 in fines during a property dispute. The more stories we heard, the uglier everything became. This HOA wasn't maintaining standards. It was running a fear-based system, and now the system was collapsing. Around 5 p.m., an emergency neighborhood meeting was announced. Attendance mandatory. That phrase alone annoyed people. Still, the clubhouse overflowed again. Only this time Cheryl Simmons looked completely different. Gone was the arrogant smile. Gone was the polished confidence. She looked tired, sweaty, cornered. Several lawyers sat beside her. That usually means disaster. Robert Langley, the HOA treasurer, stepped to the microphone first. His hands trembled visibly. After legal review, the board has identified significant procedural concerns involving historic land agreements. The room exploded instantly. Questions flew everywhere. People demanded answers. Then Robert raised both hands. Please understand, we are still investigating. One homeowner shouted, did the HOA illegally fine people or not? Silence. That silence answered everything. Then Cheryl stood. We are working toward resolution. The crowd immediately booed. Actually booed. I'd never seen anything like it at an HOA meeting. Cheryl tried continuing. Certain misunderstandings regarding easement authority. Grandpa interrupted calmly from the back row. There was no misunderstanding. The room went silent. Grandpa slowly stood. You ignored signed legal agreements because you assumed nobody would challenge you. Nobody argued, because he was right. Then Cheryl snapped. You're enjoying this. Grandpa looked genuinely confused. No, you're humiliating this board publicly. Grandpa sighed. No, Cheryl, your board did that yourselves. Massive applause erupted. Even people who once supported the HOA now looked furious. Then something unexpected happened. Robert Langley adjusted the microphone nervously. There's another issue the board must disclose. The room quieted instantly. Robert swallowed hard. Financial audits revealed irregular legal expenditures connected to selective enforcement actions. My stomach dropped. Selective enforcement, meaning they specifically targeted certain homeowners, including Grandpa. People started shouting again. One woman screamed, You used our HOA fees to harass neighbors. Robert looked miserable. It appears some enforcement actions were prioritized unfairly. Cheryl slammed her hand on the table. This is ridiculous. But nobody believed her anymore. The illusion of authority had shattered. Then Samuel Pierce entered the clubhouse carrying additional documents. That's never good. He walked directly to the front. County review completed preliminary findings. You could hear people breathing. Samuel opened the folder. Based on original Morgan development agreements, the HOA may have exceeded legal authority for approximately 14 years. Complete chaos. Some homeowners looked furious. Others looked terrified. One man actually sat down like his knees stopped working. Then Samuel added the sentence that destroyed Cheryl completely. Mr. Walter Morgan retains enforceable property rights connected to the primary subdivision roads. The room exploded louder than before. People stared at Grandpa like he transformed into a billionaire superhero. Tyler whispered beside me, "Grandpa just reversed, the entire HOA." Honestly, that was surprisingly accurate. Cheryl looked absolutely stunned, because deep down she finally realized the truth. She spent years mocking an old man whose family literally made the neighborhood possible, and now every bad decision was coming back all at once. Then Grandpa delivered the line nobody expected. "I'm not interested in revenge." The room quieted. I just wanted respect. That hit harder than shouting ever could, because suddenly everybody understood this entire disaster could have been avoided if the HOA simply treated people like human beings. But Cheryl still couldn't let go. "You think owning old farmland makes you powerful," she snapped. Grandpa smiled sadly. "No." Then he looked around the room. "But kindness would have." That ended the meeting. Not officially, emotionally, because everyone knew Cheryl Simmons lost. The only question left was how much damage the HOA would suffer before it ended, and the answer came 3 days later, when homeowners filed the biggest lawsuit Maple Ridge Estates had ever seen. Monday morning looked peaceful. Birds chirped. Sprinklers clicked across manicured lawns. Sunlight reflected off luxury windows throughout Maple Ridge Estates. But underneath that calm surface, pure chaos. Because overnight, 43 homeowners officially joined a class action lawsuit against the HOA. 43. That number shocked everyone, especially Cheryl Simmons. Apparently, years of fear disappeared quickly once people realized bullies can bleed too. Tyler burst into Grandpa's kitchen, holding his laptop. "You need to see this." Headlines covered the screen. Residents revolt against luxury HOA after land ownership scandal. Veteran homeowner challenges HOA authority. Maple Ridge residents demand refunds for illegal fines. Grandpa squinted at the screen. "Why do reporters always make everything sound dramatic?" "Because dramatic gets clicks," Tyler replied. Grandpa frowned. "That sounds unhealthy." Again, not wrong. Meanwhile, Cheryl went into survival mode. Emergency emails flooded homeowners' inboxes. The HOA promised organizational restructuring. They suspended fines temporarily. They announced independent audits. Too late. Nobody trusted them anymore. The fear barrier had broken. And once that happens, systems built on intimidation collapse fast. By noon, neighbors gathered outside Grandpa's house again. But this time felt different. Not nervous. United. Families brought food. People shared stories. Even residents who barely spoke before now laughed together on the porch. It almost felt like the neighborhood was healing in real time. Carl Reynolds, a retired police officer from 2 streets over, sat beside Grandpa drinking lemonade. Carl said, "People used to avoid each other here." Grandpa nodded. "Fear does that." Carl looked around at the gathering neighbors. Funny how fast that changed. Because Cheryl accidentally accomplished the exact opposite of what she wanted. She tried isolating Grandpa. Instead, she united the neighborhood against her. Around 2 p.m., black SUVs arrived outside the clubhouse. More attorneys. More investigators. Word spread quickly that the HOA's insurance company might refuse coverage for certain lawsuits. That terrified homeowners. Not because they supported Cheryl. Because HOA legal disasters affect everyone financially. Still, most residents blame the board entirely. And honestly, they were right. Then something unbelievable happened. Former HOA Secretary Melissa Carter publicly released archived emails. Hundreds of them. Selective enforcement discussions. Target lists. Internal complaints about undesirable property appearances. And yes, multiple emails specifically targeting Grandpa Walter. One message from Cheryl read, "If Morgan refuses modernization, continued pressure may encourage relocation." Relocation. That word made my blood boil. They weren't maintaining standards. They were trying to force an old man out of his home. Tyler stared at the screen. "These people are evil." Grandpa shook his head slowly. "No, just arrogant." Maybe that's worse, because arrogance convinces people they deserve control over others. By evening, reporters lined the subdivision entrance. News helicopters even circled briefly overhead. Maple Ridge Estates had become national HOA drama. One reporter approached Grandpa while he watered tomatoes. "Mr. Morgan, do you plan to take ownership control of the neighborhood?" Grandpa laughed so hard he nearly dropped the hose. "I'm 82 years old," he replied. "I barely want control of my television remote." The clip went viral instantly. People loved him, not because he was rich, because he sounded normal, grounded, human. Meanwhile, Cheryl completely lost public support. Neighbors openly ignored her. Some refused speaking to her entirely. Even former allies distanced themselves. Power disappears quickly when fear stops working. Then Tuesday night changed everything again. An emergency board resignation meeting was announced. Every single resident showed up. The clubhouse overflowed into the parking lot. Phones recorded everywhere. Tension filled the air. Robert Langley stepped forward first. His voice shook. "Effective immediately, I resign from the Maple Ridge HOA board." One by one, other members followed. Treasurer, secretary, compliance officers. Everybody resigned, except Cheryl. Of course. She stood alone near the front table, wearing another expensive blazer, still trying to look powerful. But nobody feared her anymore. That's the thing about bullies. Once people stop being afraid, they suddenly look very small. Cheryl grabbed the microphone. "I did what was necessary to protect this neighborhood." The crowd groaned instantly. Then Grandpa stood slowly from the back. "You protected appearances," he said calmly. "Silence. But community survived through respect." Nobody interrupted, because everybody knew he was right. Then Cheryl finally exploded. "You old fool." Gasps spread across the room. She pointed toward Grandpa. "You manipulated everyone with some ancient land deed." Grandpa remained calm. "No, you destroyed yourself with arrogance." That line hit like a hammer, and Cheryl knew it. Her face twisted with anger. "You think people care about you?" Before Grandpa could answer, something incredible happened. The entire room stood up, not dramatically, naturally. Neighbors, families, people Cheryl spent years intimidating, standing behind Grandpa Walter Morgan. And suddenly Cheryl looked completely alone. Carl Reynolds spoke first. He treated people better than this board ever did. Applause erupted. Then another neighbor shouted, "You mocked the wrong man." More applause. Cheryl looked around desperately. No allies, no support, no fear left to control. Then Grandpa quietly delivered the sentence nobody forgot. "A house doesn't make a neighborhood valuable." Complete silence. "The people inside it do." That ended Cheryl Simmons. Emotionally, socially, completely. She resigned that same night. No speech, no dignity. Just a woman walking out of a clubhouse while the community she tried controlling finally turned its back on her. But the story still wasn't over. Because the next morning, Grandpa Walter Morgan made a decision nobody expected. A decision that transformed Maple Ridge forever. Wednesday morning arrived unusually quiet. No HOA emails. No violation notices. No neighborhood drama exploding online. After weeks of chaos, Maple Ridge Estates almost felt peaceful again. Almost. Because underneath that calm sat one massive unanswered question. What happens now? The HOA board had collapsed. Legal investigations continued. Homeowners demanded refunds. And technically, Grandpa Walter Morgan still held enforceable rights connected to the neighborhood roads, meaning the future of Maple Ridge suddenly depended on the old man everybody mocked. Tyler walked into the kitchen carrying his phone. "Grandpa, reporters are calling you the king of Maple Ridge now." Grandpa looked horrified. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." Honestly, fair reaction. Still, people admired him. Not because he fought back, because he never became cruel while doing it. That matters. A lot. Around noon, County Mediator Laura Bennett arrived for a private meeting. Unlike the lawyer Cheryl brought earlier, Laura actually seemed interested in solving problems. She sat at Grandpa's kitchen table reviewing documents quietly. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Morgan, you understand you're in a very powerful position legally." Grandpa nodded. "I understand. You could challenge significant portions of neighborhood governance." "I could." Laura folded her hands. So what exactly do you want? That question hung in the room, because everybody expected revenge. The HOA bullied him publicly, humiliated him, targeted his home for years. Most people would strike back hard. Grandpa surprised everyone. I want the neighborhood fix. Laura blinked. That's it. Grandpa nodded slowly. I don't care about punishing people. I care about stopping this nonsense from happening again. That was Grandpa Walter Morgan in one sentence. Strong enough to destroy them, wise enough not to. Over the next several hours, they negotiated a proposal, a real one, transparent finances, limitations on enforcement powers, protection against selective targeting, mandatory homeowner voting on major changes, and most importantly, no more harassment disguised as community standards. Laura looked genuinely impressed. You've thought about this before. Grandpa smiled. I've watched people for a long time. That evening, another neighborhood meeting was announced. Attendance optional. Funny how quickly mandatory disappeared after Cheryl left. The clubhouse filled again anyway. Only now the atmosphere felt different. No tension, no fear, just curiosity. Neighbors talked openly. Kids played outside near the parking lot. It actually felt like a community gathering instead of a courtroom. Laura Bennett stepped to the microphone first. After review of legal agreements and homeowner concerns, a restructuring proposal has been reached. People leaned forward immediately. Then Laura outlined Grandpa's plan. Limited HOA authority, financial transparency, independent oversight, protection against selective enforcement, community voting requirements, and finally, the Morgan family would retain historical easement rights but would not interfere with normal neighborhood operations. People looked stunned. One homeowner stood. Wait, Mr. Morgan isn't taking control. Grandpa laughed softly. Son, I don't even like controlling the thermostat. The room burst into laughter. Then applause. Real applause. Not for power. For decency. A woman near the front raised her hand. Mr. Morgan, after everything they did to you, why help us? Grandpa grew quiet. Then he looked around the room carefully. Because most of you weren't the problem. Silence. You were just afraid. That hit everybody hard. Because it was true. Fear kept good people silent while bad leadership grew stronger. Then Grandpa continued. But communities survive when good people finally stand together. Tyler whispered beside me. He's absolutely cooking right now. I almost laughed. The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours. Questions, discussions, votes. And for the first time in years, homeowners actually sounded hopeful. Not hostile. Hopeful. The restructuring passed overwhelmingly. 92% approval. That's practically unheard of in HOA politics. Afterward, neighbors surrounded Grandpa. Not because he owned the street. Because he protected the neighborhood from becoming something ugly. Carl Reynolds shook Grandpa's hand firmly. You saved this place. Grandpa shook his head. No. Then he gestured around the room. They did. Again, that was Grandpa, always redirecting credit. Always grounding things back in people instead of ego. Meanwhile, Cheryl Simmons completely vanished from public life. Rumors spread that she planned moving out of Maple Ridge. Nobody seemed surprised. Her power depended entirely on control. Without that, there wasn't much left. Late that night, I sat with Grandpa on the porch swing Cheryl once tried removing. Warm summer air drifted through the oak trees. Neighborhood lights glowed softly down the street. You could have crushed them, I said quietly. Grandpa rocked slowly. Maybe. So why didn't you? He stayed silent a while, then finally answered, because bitterness spreads faster than kindness. I looked toward the neighborhood. Families laughed in nearby yards. Kids rode bikes beneath streetlights. The entire place felt more alive than it had in years. Grandpa noticed me watching. You know the funny thing. What? The old house they marked ended up protecting the entire street. That line stayed with me, because it was true. The house everybody called outdated became the reason Maple Ridge finally remembered what a neighborhood should feel like. But Grandpa still had one final surprise left. And when he revealed it during the annual community celebration, half the neighborhood started crying. 3 months later, Maple Ridge Estates barely resembled the neighborhood Cheryl Simmons once controlled. Not physically, emotionally. People waved at each other again. Families hosted block parties. Neighbors stopped obsessing over appearances and started caring about actual community. Even the HOA clubhouse changed. Gone were the aggressive warning posters and violation boards. Now local kids' artwork decorated the walls. Community gardens replaced restricted landscape zones. And somehow, property values still survived. Funny how kindness doesn't destroy neighborhoods after all. The annual Maple Ridge Summer Festival arrived in early June. For years, the event felt stiff and corporate. Expensive catering, forced smiles, people quietly judging each other's clothing and cars. This year, completely different. Food trucks lined the street. Live music played near the clubhouse. Families spread picnic blankets beneath the oak trees Grandpa's father planted decades earlier. And for the first time since moving there, I genuinely loved the neighborhood. Tyler walked around filming everything for social media. You realize Grandpa is basically a local celebrity now, right? Grandpa overheard him. I survived would just become internet content. Tyler nearly collapsed laughing. Around sunset, the new neighborhood committee gathered everyone near the clubhouse stage. Laura Bennett stepped forward holding a microphone. Tonight we'd like to recognize someone who reminded Maple Ridge what community actually means. People immediately started clapping. Grandpa looked deeply uncomfortable, which honestly made the applause louder. Then Laura smiled. "Mr. Walter Morgan, would you join us, please?" Grandpa sighed dramatically. This already sounds suspicious. The crowd laughed. He slowly walked toward the stage while neighbors cheered. Not fake applause. Not polite applause. Real appreciation. Laura handed him a small wooden box. Grandpa frowned. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside rested an old brass street marker, beautifully polished, freshly engraved. Grandpa stared silently. Then Laura announced, "By unanimous community vote, the main road through Maple Ridge Estates will officially be renamed Morgan Way." The crowd erupted. People stood cheering. Some actually cried. And Grandpa Walter Morgan, for the first time since I'd known him, he looked speechless. Tyler whispered beside me, "No way." Laura continued, "Because before there was a neighborhood here, there was a family that built the land beneath it." Grandpa swallowed hard. Then she added, "And because one old house reminded us all that communities are built by people, not appearances." That got everybody. Even Carl Reynolds wiped his eyes. Grandpa finally stepped toward the microphone. The crowd quieted instantly. He looked around slowly at the neighborhood. Families, children, neighbors talking together. People who once feared each other now standing united. Then Grandpa smiled softly. "You know," complete silence. "When my wife and I first lived here, there weren't any fancy homes." A few people laughed. Just dirt roads, trees, and neighbors who looked out for each other. He paused, and somewhere along the way, people forgot that. Nobody moved. But lately, Grandpa looked around again. "I think we remembered." Massive applause erupted. Then Grandpa delivered the line people would repeat for years afterward. "A valuable neighborhood isn't measured by property prices. Silence. It's measured by whether people feel welcome coming home." That hit every person there. Because deep down, everyone knew Maple Ridge finally felt like home again. After the ceremony ended, neighbors stayed outside for hours. Kids played basketball in the street. Families shared food. Music drifted beneath the summer sky. Nobody worried about violations. Nobody measured grass. Nobody cared whose house looked older. And somehow the neighborhood looked better than ever. Later that night, I sat beside Grandpa on the porch swing once again. The newly installed Morgan Way sign stood proudly at the corner beneath glowing streetlights. Grandpa stated it quietly. "You know what's funny?" he said. "What?" "I spent years thinking this old house would disappear after I'm gone." I looked toward the home. Peeling paint, old wood, warm porch lights. Still standing, still stubborn, still full of history. "It's not going anywhere," I told him. Grandpa smiled softly. "Good." Then he leaned back on the swing. "You can learn a lot from old houses." "How's that?" They survived storms because they were built with care. I looked around the neighborhood one last time. Neighbors laughing, lights glowing, a street finally acting like a community. And I realized something important. The HOA board thought Grandpa's house represented the past. But they were wrong. It represented everything the future desperately needed more of. Respect, humility, kindness, and people willing to stand their ground when bullies mistake arrogance for power. Because in the end, the old man they mocked didn't just own the street. He reminded everyone what it was supposed to mean.